Thanks. I'm Drew Pierce. I'm from St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana, and my background is in philosophy. Although I direct our Justice Studies program too, which is kind of an interdisciplinary program, which is where most of my interests in housing issues come to fore.
Great. Sarah, I think you two already know each other, but
Yes, so my name is Sarah Barr. I work at Amherst College and I report to the provost, but my home is in the community engagement office, which is how I got connected with Campus Compact. And we have quite a housing problem in Massachusetts. Our vacancy rate is actually 2.5%, the lowest in the country. So there are fascinating pressures that we are facing, and I am grateful for this cohort and the opportunity to think about housing together.
awesome. Thank you so much. Hill.
Hi everyone, I'm Hillary Kane. I'm the director of an organization called FEND, which is the Philadelphia Higher Education Network for Neighborhood Development. We're sort of like a mini campus compact in the Philadelphia region and housed at Penn. So I'm sort of colleagues with Tony, but I always joke that we pretend to be an independent organization because we want the 24 other campus partners to feel equally
Right.
at the table, Temple, LaSalle, Villanova, Community College of Philadelphia, et cetera, et cetera. I'm interested in housing for a few reasons. I mean, just as a former urban studies grad, major, and just someone who loves cities, and housing is the big pain point, right? It's the most expensive thing on almost everybody's, family budget. As someone who runs AmeriCorps programs and pays AmeriCorps wages, housing has become a particularly big pain point in the last couple of years. And then also, and we just put in another proposal, so we'll see, but we have been trying to get funding to replicate an amazing model that's in Louisville called Family Scholar House that provides supportive housing to parenting college students. So college students who themselves are also parents.
Awesome. Okay.
So yeah, just trying to learn all the resources. And the book that I just finished reading that I will put into the mix is Key to the City
Oh, yes.
about zoning. That was like really fascinating. And yeah,
It's a
so
great
that's it.
book. Great. Thank you. Elizabeth, I think you're joining us from University of South Carolina. Um,
Teresa. Hi,
Oh,
everyone.
I'm
I'm
so
Teresa.
sorry. I'm
That's
looking
okay.
at the wrong name. Hello, Teresa. Good to see you. Good to hear you.
Yes, thank you all for having me. I'm sorry that I have my camera off, but I
It's all
literally
good.
just got back from an hour-long drive to see community partners in another county. So I'm just a little bit tired and not camera ready. So I
It's all good.
apologize. But I'm the executive director of community engagement at the University of South Carolina. And just interested in the topic of affordable housing and learning more about how colleges and universities are tackling the issue. Unfortunately, University of South Carolina is currently not in good standing with Campus Compact, trying to work on getting our membership back in good standing. So
No worries.
I just appreciate being part of these conversations
Of
and
course.
getting to learn from you all. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. No, we're glad you're here. All right. So I'm going to turn it over. And thank you, Teresa. I'm going to turn it over to Jamie and let her introduce her company. And then she's got a slide deck and she's going to walk us through her work specifically at the University of North Carolina, which had a real need for high-level analysis around housing and affordability. So Jamie.
Great. And Tony, just I saw Elizabeth Thornton is on and Brenda joined, so I don't know if they want to introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Brenda.
Hey,
Hi,
Brenda.
this is Brenda. Hi, sorry to be off camera. I'm driving, but Brenda from Housing Works Rhode Island. We're a community partner at Roger Williams University in Rhode Island.
Outstanding. Thanks for being here today. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And yeah, there is an Elizabeth on the phone. She works with me here at Penn.
Great.
I apologize for that. So we're all good.
Great. Well, thanks, Tony, for having me on this afternoon, and thank you all for joining. As Tony mentioned, my name's Jamie Flaherty. I'm a managing director at U3 Advisors. We are a real estate consulting firm. We really strategic advisory firm focused on real estate and economic development, primarily with higher education. We do work with hospitals and medical centers, as Tony mentioned as well. I would say about 80% of our clients are university related. The other 20% nonprofits. We work with some government organizations, downtown bids, et cetera. And we actually also do a lot of work with philanthropy that tends to fund our work, especially when we're trying to pull together multiple institutions to invest in and around their campuses. So I always like to describe us, like when people say, oh, real estate, they think broker or they think master planner. So I said, we're not brokers, we're not planners, we're not architects, we're not developers, but we sort of do everything else in between. All of the interstitial work, all of the pre-development work, all of the upfront analysis, all of the strategic work. And we often act on behalf of our institutional clients as their real estate arm, as many institutions either don't have the real estate expertise or have their own department in real estate, or they have a project focus and they need help with, you know, a particular piece. So I'm going to pull up my slides and just do sort of a quick overview. As I mentioned, U3 Advisors, we're headquartered in Philadelphia. We have offices in New York, Boston. And then we have people who are sitting around the country, Houston, Chicago, et cetera. So we've been together for about 20 years. Our CEO was actually the former senior vice president at Penn. So Tony, which is where Tony and I met 25 years ago in school together. But we've worked with over 125 higher education institutions across the country and some international, as well as a number of nonprofits, philanthropies, and private public sector organizations. So from an organizational standpoint, we're 25 people. As I mentioned, we're strategic advisors. We often partner with developers, with architects, and with institutions, as well as government organizations, to really come up with holistic strategies. And our work is focused in these 6 practice areas. I'll kind of quickly go over it because it's hard. This was our way of trying to organize the work, but often what we do with clients ends up hitting 3 or 4 or 5 of these buckets. So our anchor strategy work is what we call our live, buy, hire, build local programs. And that's where we help institutions really understand how to harness their own internal demand to have an impact on the neighborhoods. And a lot of that is extremely data driven. So we'll take institutional data and then marry that with everything that we can overlay. We're very visually driven to try to help institutions really understand what they're dealing with and how they can go ahead with implementing. And the other thing that sort of differentiates us from just a kind of a traditional planning firm is we often work with institutions and entities all the way through implementation. So we'll set up the programs and help run them for a bit to get them off the ground. The next would be real estate analysis and development. So that's very straightforward. That's where we're often issuing RFPs on behalf of an institution. We're negotiating with developers on their behalf. So we'll take a project all the way from conception up to development and then hand over the reins typically to a developer to do a particular project. But we also help with acquisition and disposition strategies, as well as helping institutions try to figure out how to optimize a particular piece of land or a building that needs to be redeveloped. Innovation districts and initiatives is what it sounds like. We're working on mostly how to marry the academic side with the place-based side and how to kind of do all that work in between of how to really help institutions spell out what they can offer to a P3 or offer to an innovation district project. Urban design and campus planning. We have a woman who works with us. She was a former partner at Sasaki who did all of their campus planning work. So she really helps us translate what we're doing on the programmatic and data and financial side into the physical reality. Then community partnerships and organizational design and capacity is really around, as I mentioned previously, we'll often work with philanthropy on bringing together multiple institutions to set up organizations that can then help an entire neighborhood or entire edge of a particular city. And that's everything from we've set up bids, community development organizations, partnerships between institutions and their government organizations to try to really have a much more significant impact on the area. And that's where a lot of our anchor strategy work also kind of falls into that organizational side of things. And then organizational design and capacity, again, a bit of an overlap there, but we'll work with institutions, facilities, and real estate departments to help them optimize how they're running things, to help them optimize how they're running projects. And so we just have a lot of experience working with those organizations and have found over time that we can kind of bring a third-party lens into how to best run internal organizations as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly touch on what the work that I recently did, and this is going to tie into your speaker for your next series. And then I'll get into the UNC work. But the Council for Academic Workforce Housing is an organization that is run by Victor Van Zandt from the University of California, Irvine. And I happened to be introduced to him several years ago. And he set up an organization that is focused on academic workforce housing, and he runs a really successful program out in Irvine. One that would be extremely difficult to replicate in most areas. But what he brings is a real knowledge and curiosity about how to tackle this huge problem that institutions large and small are facing across the country. So I actually got hooked up with him and went out to speak at his conference a couple of weeks ago. We offered to do a research study for some of the members of that organization. So I'm only saying that because I'm about to flip through all those slides to get to the UNC work, but then I'm happy to come back and talk about the work that we did with CAW as well. And for those of you that are really involved in your institutions around housing, this is definitely an organization that I recommend checking out. They're trying to figure out who they want to be. Right now it's a very informal, they have a conference once a year. But I was able to attend the conference in Reno a few weeks ago, and it was really very interesting, a great group of people. So as I mentioned, I'm just flipping through to get to the UNC slides. Okay. So University of North Carolina, I happen to know Gordon Merklin, who runs real estate there. I've known him for years. And so we were chatting a couple of years ago, and he was just talking about the idea that they had a few parcels of land that they were looking at. They have a huge crunch in Chapel Hill with rising costs, and we're struggling with how to attract and retain faculty and staff. And this, again, this is a story that I think almost all of you could relate to and understand. People used to believe the housing affordability crisis was a coastal problem, and it certainly is not. And so as we started talking, the thing that Gordon was struggling with was, a mandate by the board and the chancellor to really take a look at this problem from a supply side. And he was saying, I don't understand what, like, I don't know. I can't define the problem. I was hired here 20 years ago. I bought a house in Chapel Hill, no problem. And now new people coming in can live anywhere close, but it's all anecdotal. So I want to figure out, I want to understand, I want to define what the problem is. So as I mentioned before, our work is deeply rooted in data. So we worked with him to come up with a methodology, to really try to understand and define from the demand side, what is the problem they were facing. So just a quick sort of overview. As I mentioned, Research Triangle has exploded in population. Housing market has become extremely expensive and competitive in the last 5 years. And while developers and planners have added a lot of housing units throughout the Triangle, most of the stock in Chapel Hill has been, the market rate in existing rental has been switched over to owner occupied housing because they had a lot of out of towners able to move in, buy this stock, renovate it, and then it just absolutely drove up prices around them and really squeezed out the rental market. And they weren't, and also they were not in Chapel Hill keeping up with the levels of supply that were happening around the rest of the Triangle. So the impact, really, what we did was we took a very deep dive into what the for sale and rental market looked like, as well as the demand drivers from UNC. And I'll walk you through what that methodology looks like. So what we did is we collected data from, we actually worked with both UNC and the health system simultaneously. So we did individual studies for their demand side, but obviously the supply side analysis was similar because we were looking at the same areas. So we took a look at UNC employees as well as UNC graduate students. And we basically, what we do is we send a very detailed data request list to the institutions. And we ask for anonymized data that identifies where an employee lives, what their income is, what department they're in, what their tenure has been like at the institution. And then what we can do is map all of that information and really start to decipher patterns and understand what an institution is dealing with. So we took all of that data and we mapped it, which I'll get to in the next several slides. But we also designed and administered a survey around housing choice and preference that actually we had 2,000 employees and graduate students actually fill out, which I'm sure you've all run surveys in your own institutions, and it's hard to get people to respond. But this was clearly, I think they did a great job with how they got the survey out. And they also, this is such a huge interest and need for a lot of these employees that I think they were very eager to respond. We then followed the survey up with some targeted focus groups so we could really truly understand and hear from people what they're dealing with. And then finally, we evaluated the market housing trends for both rental and for sale within all the key clusters that we were able to define by truly understanding where these employees and grad students live. So we received over 12,000 records, of which almost 4,000 were faculty and 8,400 were staff. And with this information, we were able to do a pretty detailed demographic overview to help UNC understand employee age distribution, years of employment, gender, race, ethnicity, and then salary bands. And this was really just sort of set the context to say, this is what this information can tell you, and this is what we understand is happening. Similarly, we did the same thing with grad students. We mapped about 8,700 grad students and wanted to understand age distribution, what their stipends are, and what programs they're in. Because a lot of times with these programs, we know that certain students are able to afford more in terms of housing simply because of the jobs that they're likely going to get when they're out of school. So this is a map of the employees, and what we were able to do, again, each dot is an individual employee. Obviously, the closer we get in a cluster, they're sort of mashing together. But this gives a really good kind of detailed understanding of where their employees are living. And then what we were able to do was overlay drive times to say, how many of your employees can actually walk to campus? Who's within a 10-minute drive time, up to 60 minutes. So this was just, again, a good way for not only UNC to understand where their employees are living, but they also were sort of struggling with how to think about upgrading their shuttle routes and what they need to do to get people in and on campus faster, parking issues, as I'm sure many of you are dealing with. So this information was also extremely helpful for them to then pass on to transportation and see if they couldn't be smarter about how they were accessing people. So similar map for the grad students. And so after we get all of this data and really dive into it and take a look at it, we start to analyze and say, so what? What are we trying to get at? We understand that 75% of faculty and staff drive to work, and this came straight out of the survey, by the way. So we are overlaying the qualitative and quantitative data. 15% say they bike or walk. But only 4% of staff bike and walk. And that's because faculty tend to trend to live closer to campus. 51% of grad students rely on transit, 22% bike walk, et cetera. But they often are living, if they are commuting, living farther from campus. Again, not surprising, where the stock is cheaper. People who should live close live the farthest. And this came straight out of mapping and understanding that for the maintenance and service workers, which typically need to be on campus during odd shift hours and don't have the option of working from home, had a median drive time of 25 minutes, which was the highest among all positions. I will say we caveat this. The reason why the survey is so interesting and important is because a lot of that is choice as well. So what we were hearing from the head of facilities, sure, my staff might want to live closer, but most of them don't want to. Most of them choose where they're living. And a lot of people who have lived out around here for quite some time make their choices not just based on commute time. So it was good for everyone to sort of understand that there's qualitative components to the data. And then another just sort of point that we called out, the median drive time for employees earning less than 80,000 was 21 minutes. The median employees for earning more than 80,000 was 13 minutes. So a direct correlation between what you earn and where you live. So looking sort of deeper into, we wanted to understand the nuances of the particular neighborhoods and areas that people are living in. And this is it's particularly important for families, knowing that a lot of families are making choices based on schools. And so this map allowed UNC to understand very quickly, knowing which school districts are the most sort of optimal, where people are coming from, where they're concentrating. There was some surprising information here for them regarding certain suburbs that they didn't realize were growing as fast as they were. So I thought that was really interesting to help them see what they thought and understood where employees were living actually in a lot of ways was not true, especially for the newer employees that are coming in and making particular choices. So we took a deep dive into each of the areas. These are the 5 suburbs or areas that had the most employees. 60% of the employees were living in these key clusters. And so we then wanted to help them understand, based on these employees, what is the median age? How many are making over the $80,000 a year? Which percentage are academic, research, and clinical? Which are administrative, maintenance and service, et cetera? What's the median tenure? And what percentage of them have been working here for less than 5 years? Because that was really the big sticking point. UNC felt like 5 years ago was when things dramatically changed, and they really wanted to sort of hone in on that breaking point. So as I mentioned, this is the survey responses. And again, qualitatively, because there's certain things, of course, we can't get from the data, right? So we had to make estimated guesses based on who's dual income, who could afford what, and that we basically had to overlay that with the regional trends of dual income households. But what we couldn't get at with this information was were families with school-age children. So I think had they gone back and wanted to kind of dive deeper into that, they could have with the survey. And that also is information that typically is semi-available in the HR data, but it is always a fight with HR departments to get this information as is. So we've done it for so many institutions because we've mapped students, especially as we're doing student housing projects, as well as trying to understand other information about faculty and staff. And we've really gone toe to toe to probably 50 HR departments, but we usually get the data, so it's worth it when you can do it. So this survey really told us that faculty are about, much more likely to own their home than staff. Only about 18% of staff earning less than $75,000 could own their own home, and 45% of staff earning one salary own their own home. So through the qualitative survey data, we were able to ask questions about partnership and dependence. But this, I think overall, this really it tied pretty neatly with the quantitative data that we pulled, but we were able to get much more nuance with the questions that we asked. So these slides are really a broad overview of the housing market. So we understand that, and this again, qualitative and quantitative, but a lot of this work is really coming from publicly available data. But the growth in the triangle has largely been driven by inbound migration, with a lot of the new companies coming and setting up and putting a ton of pressure on the housing market. And the population does continue to diversify, which is a good thing. The majority of new construction has occurred in Raleigh and the exurbs and parts of Durham. And that's due to a lack of available land in Chapel Hill, as well as a pretty strong NIMBY culture there. And that they are suffering because they've made it pretty difficult to develop right in that area. So that's been a big problem for UNC, that wants their faculty and staff closer to campus. Rental supply, we took a look at as well, has also increased. However, median rents have outpaced increases in median income, not entirely unsurprising either. And sale prices have been increasing. It was a slower appreciation due to 2008 and what we saw, because we pulled the data from 10 years prior. However, during COVID, we were able to track, and again, this is pulling directly from Zillow sales data, that there were 20 to 25% year over year increases in some of the areas. And that had to do with a lot of people during and post-COVID moving down to the Carolinas. I talked a bit about the rental growth already. Median home price, we pulled a sample of 400 recently sold properties in the area, using a tool that we built to really analyze Zillow data. And median home price is $488,000, And that has increased by 67% in the Raleigh-Durham market since 2018. A huge spike. Buying a home in Chapel Hill or Carborough, which is the neighborhood just adjacent to Chapel Hill, is 1.3 times more expensive than the regional median, and rent is 1.4 times more expensive. Again, not entirely surprising with the university right there. Although, when you're thinking about the region itself of the triangle, you also have Duke and NC State, and other institutions. So it's not, obviously it's not purely driven just by UNC being there. Each of those neighborhoods has that pressure. So again, this is a summary. This is a lot of detail that you guys probably aren't entirely interested in because it's not your neighborhood. But this is the kind of information that for UNC was extremely compelling and important to understand and important to reflect back on, because as they start to think about what their goals are, this was a helpful way to benchmark where they are right now. And as you can see, Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Chapel Hill exurbs with a median home price of, 600,000 plus. It's much cheaper once you start to move central North Durham and South Durham. And this was another, this is a summary of the survey response about market pressure. So staff and graduate students definitely articulated that they're much more dissatisfied with their housing choice than faculty. Again, with more of the transient nature and them being new and coming in and not earning as much, that's not a surprise. And they're also much more interested in moving in the next 5 years. 75% of that cohort did indicate that they wanted to buy. So their intention to stay in the area, to stay with UNC, came through loud and clear, and that they are looking to get out of their rental product and really set down roots. 90% of staff said that they were looking to move, but they would not buy a home over, $450,000, which is $38,000 below the regional median. So I think that number as well was really important for UNC to understand, to say, we have an issue in that we can't, as state employees, just increase, salaries, obviously, but what is our role and what is our obligation to provide, or at least come up with solutions for more affordable housing, as we're not increasing our salaries, but the housing prices are going through the roof.
Jamie, do you want to take questions during?
Oh,
or-
sure. Yeah.
Hillary just raised her hand.
Yeah, thanks. I was just gonna say, like, it's kind of odd to ask people. I mean, obviously you can ask people what they're willing to pay, but to some degree that's driven by what they make. And so,
Totally.
I think like you could backwards map what people can theoretically safely afford to do based on those salary. I mean, obviously you don't know if people have spouses and, like that makes a big difference, but anyway, I just
Well,
wanted to
Hillary,
make that point.
you perfectly set up my next like 2 or 3 slides, which is which is about the cost burden. Because again, there's so many assumptions that we can't make with this, right? Like we don't know if you're dual income. We don't know if you come with, a whole trust fund. There's a whole host of things, or the reverse of that you might make a lot of money and you have a ton of other financial obligations. So this is the best we can do in terms of understanding trends. And so what you see here on the left is employee salaries, single income only, and an understanding of what that means in terms of how you could back that into affordability. But then we made the assumption that there are plenty of households that are dual income. And so we then took, based on marital status, employee age, and the percentage of the region's population married at that age, that there were a certain percentage of dual income earners. And so what we did again, for the dual income was we just applied the median North Carolina salary of $42,000. Again, completely agnostic if maybe your partner works part-time and makes 20 grand, or your partner makes 600 grand. So there's no way we could really know that, but this at least made it more realistic to back into what people can afford without acting as if they're the only member of their household responsible for those costs. And so to affordably purchase a home at the region median price of $488,000, assuming a debt to income ratio of 36%, any employee would need a $97,500 down payment, $109,000 in annual income, and no more than, $2,800 in monthly housing costs. So we sort of backed into this, building a model to say, this is what, based on your employee salaries and the salary band, for 53% of your employees, it would be unaffordable to afford the median home price in the region, based on their salaries alone. When you then apply the dual income assumptions, it goes down to 22%, but that's still a rather significant number that would even be able to pay more than that they would pay more than 50% of their income, which we know is not a realistic number. However, that is what people are actually doing to afford these homes. The census says it's a third, 30%. But based on what we understood from what people are doing and their patterns down there, it's almost 50% of their income to afford a home and the auxiliary, the associated costs that go with that. So essentially what we were trying to get to is that 45%, if we assume dual income, 45% of UNC's employees would pay more than a third of their income to afford the median home value. I think that was a really sort of staggering number for them to understand. And so this is, again, just a much more detailed look by these key clusters. But it's pretty easy to see that we estimated between 70 and 80% of employees would be cost burdened to buy right around campus. So essentially, no one can come in and affordably buy a home in and around campus. So what we did basically after that analysis, you know what, I'm gonna pause on the analysis, because that was sort of the heart of what we did for them. The next steps are more on the supply side, and it's pretty specific to them, but we went into a lot of recommendations about how they can start to think about what to do on the supply side. But I could stop and see if anyone has any questions about the data or how we conduct the analysis.
Jamie, I have a question about the client, since we're all, clients on this side of the presentation. Was your client point of contact a real estate department, the president, a chancellor? And did that leader also coordinate other leaders who were policymakers at the institution?
That is a great question. So we were working, Gordon Markland is, I believe his title is Vice Chancellor of Real Estate. So he's a direct report to the CAO, who's a direct report to the chancellor. So he's, one removed from the chancellor, but so the importance of that is that he's a pretty key, he's a driver of all of their real estate strategy, but we also worked very closely with their community engagement office, who does a lot of work to understand affordable housing and other strategies within the area. We worked with the CFO to really try to understand from their perspective what's even feasible. We worked with the deans and the provost they were very helpful in helping us pull together these faculty focus groups. So yes, we were working with, Gordon pulled together all the people, all the right people to be a part of this conversation, because clearly affordable housing touches every arm. So it's clearly it's a provost issue, it's a student affairs issue, it's a government relations issue, it's a community engagement issue, it's a finance issue.
Thank you
So
for
yes.
that, because I think we all know from our experiences, you need that inter-institution coordination to get stuff done. You mentioned government relations. My last question is, was there a strategy as a state institution, or state-supported institution, I should say, it's got public support, UNC Chapel Hill, for Chapel Hill's government team to be briefing local elected officials or keeping them abreast of this? And did your company play any role in that as an advisor?
So we met with government relations and talked to them and presented this. Actually, we presented this to the chancellor, and his entire cabinet was there. And so what happened with the report, there was a simultaneous downtown master plan happening at Chapel Hill, which the government relations and community engagement folks were heavily involved in, but that was really with the town of Chapel Hill. And so this report fed into a lot of the work that they were doing and helped them understand what UNC themselves were grappling with. We didn't present that. We weren't a part of those meetings. I don't know how far this went. I mean, I know where it stands right now, but it has nothing to do with their issue. It has everything to do with state government
Mhm.
18 months ago
Yeah.
and the chancellor leaving. So, you know, a whole lot of things that happened.
Other dynamics, yeah.
I think things might be ticking up again, but there was certainly a big shakeup in their state legislature, and the chancellor departed. So
So politics always plays a role.
it
Whether
really
it's
does.
private or public or state supported, it always plays a role. So other questions before we move on? Hillary, Drew, Brenda, Sarah, Teresa, or do you want to move on to recommendations?
Well, I mean, just one thing, like maybe because I just finished reading the zoning book and also had the opportunity to see Matthew Desmond speak again earlier this week. And so I'm just thinking about, just like the inherent dilemma, right? Of like different constituencies want different things, right? And the people who are benefiting from the current status quo, generally speaking, want to keep that, right? Like they want to keep their high housing values and their exclusive communities and their schools that look the way they look. And while, I don't know, just it was a comment that Desmond made that was like, conservative renters are generally more supportive of affordable housing than liberal homeowners in
Right.
their communities. And so I was just like, oh, right. So I'm just, like, I'm trying to imagine what the resolution is that doesn't set some group, off screaming mad. And obviously the people, people with money tend to have the ears and the connections. And so, yeah, I'm just, I'm like, tell me how the story ends. Cause I can't.
Right. Well,
Right.
well, Hillary, I don't know yet. No, honestly, it actually, that is another sort of a bit of a good segue into what they want to do. And so this is just us really sort of defining like, how do institutions respond to these constraints in the housing market? It really depends. Are you asset rich, like a state institution with land, or are you cash rich, like some privates, not all, obviously? And really, it's a different intervention on both sides. So and then we ran through a bunch of case studies of how other institutions do this, have done this. And then really some sort of insights around ways to get this done. So is it a JV? Is it institutions actually building their own affordable and workforce or collaborating with housing authorities? There's a lot of supply side institutions, I'm sorry, solutions, building purpose-built housing for your own faculty and staff that then often does not really rub people the wrong way because it is considered its own sort of piece and it's not necessarily affecting the market in those particular areas that may be very concerned about what it means for their neighborhood and their property values. And so, this for UNC, they had two possible sites that they were thinking of. And we kind of toured these with them and took a look. And the idea was to build a product type that was very different from what you can actually get in Chapel Hill right now. Chapel Hill is a lot of single family homes, large, beautiful single family homes, and a lot of purpose-built student housing. Not a lot of townhomes or condominiums that would be appealing to young professionals and young families. And so there was a hole in their market. So again, I think that speaks to no one was coming in saying we're going to build a bunch of, quarter acre single family homes or try to influx this with so much supply that everybody's pricing goes down. It was build a different product. And so that's the direction that they're really headed in. Yeah, that's right. So really what we recommended for the next steps was you have to go in and analyze these sites seriously. Zoning, proximity, transit, pedestrian access, types of units, infrastructure requirements, et cetera. The review and incorporation of the town's complete community study, which Tony was what I was sort of referring to. This led into a little bit. Understanding what the land value is on both sides, and then summarizing what your deal structure options are. I saw Brenda. You're on. I see your hand.
Thank you. This very interesting and helpful. We do similar stuff, not quite as detailed as you in our annual housing fact book, and we're also part of the National Zoning Atlas project. So try to look at this a little bit more through that lens as well too. But and I apologize if I missed it because I had to step out for a few minutes. But do you do any analysis of kind of student impact on local market, particularly rental market, number of students who are renting, you know, and what would normally be kind of naturally occurring affordable housing, but or you know often displace lower income families or low income workers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've done a lot of work understanding, again, similarly mapping students and understanding exactly where they live, and then overlaying that with, especially if they're in some sort of apartment building or if they're in a particular block or street where we understand that the housing's been carved up into multiple units,
Mm-hmm.
and diving into what those market conditions are and understanding what they're paying, who the landlords are. We've done analyses where we'll map an entire neighborhood to understand who owns it, what kind of prices are they charging, what kind of, you know, when's the last time they did any kind of update, essentially trying to call out who are the slumlords,
Mm-hmm.
who and what are they, and what's their business model. And we've dived into those to really truly try to understand what that means, as well as overlaying that with what the demographics of the neighborhood are, of the true I shouldn't say true, students are true, of the permanent full-time residents, and what their, if there's any migration patterns that we can understand. Most of that, if you're talking about something that's happened in the last couple of years, needs to be on the ground interviews to understand, as the demographic data doesn't catch up that quickly.
Right.
But it is very easy to pinpoint where are students living, where have property values been driven down because they are rental units that have not been kept up. And we'll sort of overlay over time what those values look like. And if there's any kind of migration patterns of students, to understand if they've started to sort of take over a neighborhood.
Excellent. Great question. Great answer. This has been fantastic. Am I assuming you've reached your final slide?
I have. The only
It's
thing
been
I was going to say
wonderful.
about the
No, but wait,
cost study.
Drew has raised his hand. I want to know what Drew's question
Great.
is.
Yeah, so this might be outside of the scope of your analysis here, but I'm curious if in this case or in any other cases you've done any analysis around like short-term rentals like Airbnb and these kinds of things, and the effects that might have on affordability. Because in South Bend, I think we're relatively affordable compared to some other places, though that's, you know, starting to change. But with University of Notre Dame, it's a big draw for these you know, short-term rentals, and you have people buying up properties to turn them into Airbnbs and things like that. And there's kind of a anecdotal sense among some organizers and folks concerned about affordable housing that that's having, you know, an effect on prices, but I haven't seen any like data to support that. Is it something that you've encountered?
We did, one of my colleagues, when they were looking at, we were doing a hotel demand study for an institution, and they were trying to dive into that. It's really hard to get because you almost have to go in, you you can go in and find which houses are Airbnbs, but you can't go in and understand how they're performing. Because maybe it's only being rented out once a year, but it's being lived in the rest of the time. So we haven't come up with a great way to do that, but also we haven't really been asked that question in the sense of how is this affecting affordable housing, or is there some sort of, like, I know we do a lot of work at the University of Maryland, and they were seeing that issue, but it was anecdotal. And it turns out it was only probably like maybe 15 to 20 houses, which is a lot. But when you're talking about thousands of houses in the area, it's really not. And I think it was more neighbors were very concerned in hearing about it, and they didn't like the idea of short-term rental, less so that it was having an impact on accessibility and affordability.
A great question. It's a huge trend. Oh, you're muted, Drew. For some reason, we can't hear you. No. Weird. Okay, sorry, that was
Yeah.
weird.
It was weird.
We had you and then something happened. You could also type it in the chat and we could get to it for sure. We've got a few minutes left. I know, Jamie, you wanted to talk about your methodology a bit.
Yeah, no, I was just going to touch on so what we did, I did this presentation to the Council for Academic Workforce Housing last year when their conference was in Hawaii, and I couldn't swing that one, so I could only end up in Reno, which was fine. But what we decided to do for this group was we said, listen, like let's see if we can't understand if there's trends across the country. And what is it again? Anecdotally, everyone always thinks it's California and it's like the Northeast coastal cities that are really problematic. And what we were trying to say is that's not the case at all. We're hearing from communities. I mean, we're about to start on our third North Carolina institution to do this analysis for them because the entire state feels crunched. And so we're kind of doing a similar thing that we did with UNC. We worked with NC State and a to be named as its signed contract of another institution in North Carolina. But we're also working with Princeton right now to help them understand again, really from a detailed level, what are the trends and what are we looking at? So we actually one of these, the top right is Princeton, because we, as part of this study, we did like a pro bono, very high level. Let's see what you're dealing with. Let's see if we can decipher anything. And so we ended up for this exercise mapping between the four institutions about 65,000 employees. And frankly, a lot of the patterns were very, very similar. And it's something that, again, we had two public institutions and two privates. And so the intervention and how you handle this and what you do with this data is so very different based on your geography and the access that you have as an institution, and what constraints you have on you. But I think it was a great exercise for us and for CAW, because when I went back and presented this, to just start a really lively discussion around what these interventions could be. And I wanted to just bring this up to talk about this because, again, I mentioned Victor's going to be talking to you all in a month or so, I think, Tony.
Actually, I've got Victor Van Zant lined up for next Friday. I'm about to send a note out to the whole group. He will be joining us next Friday. It's going to be recorded, talking about his work.
You will love him. He is a great guy, and he's also been doing this for 30 years. And again, like I mentioned, UC Irvine's model is very, very different. Huge land grant institution in California. They've built an entire town essentially. That is, it's like it's a factory town, except really, really beautiful. And you'll be impressed because he's also got his methodology and sort of his take on how this is done. But I would say for all the great work that a lot of institutions are doing around trying to resolve this, or at least to have some solution, I think, Hillary, to your question, no one is going to make everybody happy. No, and it's not going to happen within the institution either. You cannot address every single person's needs. And you're not going to be able to solve affordable housing for all faculty, staff, and all of your constituents. But to start to make a dent, to start to make a concerted effort, to start to be creative about what those solutions could look like. And also, I think what Sarah and I may talk about on Monday is how to do it with other institutions. So it's not just on one school, especially if you live in an area where there's multiple institutions that are clearly all grappling with the same problem.
It's wonderful. I mean, Drew was talking about Notre Dame and St. Mary's. We're here. Sarah's in Western Massachusetts, where there's a consortium of universities. Hillary and I have been talking about Penn and Drexel in West Philly. In Rhode Island, where Brenda's calling from, you've got 3 or 4 universities all clustered up. It is really a fascinating thing to think about. You talked about factory towns. Usually there's one or more than one factory to make it a factory town. These days, I think it's one or more colleges or institutions of higher ed to make it an anchor town or a college town, right? And so that kind of natural clustering amalgamation happens. Jamie, this was great. You're such a talented presenter. Thank you so much. While I'm complimenting you, would you like to put your email address in the chat?
Sure.
If people wanted to reach out to you and ask you some questions or learn more about what you and your company does, this way
I would be happy.
Yeah, this way they've got your direct email. Folks, I encourage you to look at U3's website and do a search on them. They do really high quality work across the country and some parts of the world. And Jamie's, kind of one of the leading thinkers in this space in the whole industry. So that brings us right up to time. This was really great. Thank you very much. For those that can make it next Friday, we're doing another one of these with Victor Van Zant from UC Irvine. Really fascinating, as Jamie said, kind of building a town around a college and doing it for 30 or 40 years. An unknown experiment that deserves way more publicity. So we're really excited to host him. Jamie introduced me to him. When she heard about this group, she said, you have to know Victor. So,
Yeah.
And then I do not have a fifth person lined up for the 5 of 5. So if anyone has ideas, shoot them my way. We try to wrap this up by August before the new year starts. And with that, I'll say thanks and have a good weekend, and hope to see you all soon. Jamie, thanks so very much for giving us an hour of your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Bye-bye.